Gary Breen is waiting patiently, probably confused, and you're wondering what the hell's happened over here in the last 4 or 5 hours, Gary. But there you go. Well, if you go to sleep for a few hours, you probably missed something to do with the FAI lately.
There seems to be a statement all the time. I'm glad that Dan's coming in to dissect it rather than me. I'm glad you're just going to ask me about the football and not all that nonsense.
Well, we'll get to all that. So let's talk about the football then, because it was an interesting weekend. It kicked off, obviously, with Liverpool on Friday. We'll come to that later on. But yesterday, we had the Everton-Arsenal game live here. I know, obviously, you're an Arsenal fan and you watched them closely.
In my youth.
Yeah, in your youth. They weren't very good.
I'm not a big fan of them at the moment. I think that's been well documented at the time. But I've loved the work that Emery has done. More than anything, he's added a bit of organisation, a bit of discipline, but the old failings are there. And I don't care how good a coach you are, the problem you have there is you can't rely on that spine through that team. This group of players are not at the level required. In terms of technical ability, yes, but in terms of mental strength, no. That's evident in the fact that they're so badly performing away from home, yet to keep a clean sheet all season. And yet going into this game, I just hope that they would have seized the initiative in the fact that 10 consecutive home wins, they've got themselves into a great position. They took advantage of the kind of self-imploding that Tottenham have done, as has been the case with most seasons. And ultimately, I believe that Arsenal are the 6th best team in the Premier League, but Emery had got them to 3rd and they had a real opportunity to cement that. And once again, those failings come back again. And when the pressure's on, they just can't handle it.
So you're in that interesting position where you think Emery has done enough to justify his appointment and to inspire a bit of confidence, but he can only work with what he has, and no manager could get them to a point where they're doing any better than realistically they are at the moment. Is that the general feeling?
Well, certainly, I wouldn't kind of say that no other manager could do better. I think someone like Guardiola could do better because I think he's an exceptional manager, probably the best out there. But in terms of what Emery's done and the managers that were available to Arsenal, in terms of replacing an iconic Wenger, I know that the last few years went bad, but he has inherited Emery, an unbalanced, ill-disciplined squad who are probably the most self-rewarding group of players you've ever seen in your life in terms of high-fiving each other when they're doing particularly well. But when the real tough questions are asked, and that's ultimately what you get when you travel away from home, because when Arsenal come to town, it's obviously a big show, of course it is, and they just can't cope with it. I mean, that was basic football, that back three couldn't deal with. Calvert-Lewin, who everyone says is not good enough to lead the line at Everton, and I think he's a fabulous young man in terms of the qualities he has. But he just gave them the runaround. They just couldn't cope, and it was embarrassing at times.
So what do they need in the summer?
They need a massive overhaul. There's a massive reboot needed at Arsenal anyway. I think the very fact that Emery comes in, Gazidis brings Emery in, and you're thinking, okay, stay there, steady the ship, help your manager. But then he goes off to Syria with AC Milan and literally just walks away from it. They had a brilliant acquisition in terms of a headhunter, Mislintat, who was responsible for a lot of those Borussia Dortmund stars that we've seen come through. His nickname was Diamond Eye in terms of how good he was spotting. He's come, he's gone now. They tried to get a director of football, it hasn't worked out. Edu's the latest name we're seeing as an ex-Arsenal player, as someone who worked under Emery at Valencia, but that hasn't come to fruition. But ultimately, and this is why it's so important that they get into that Champions League, they need a massive reinvestment into that squad, because too many of those players, they're good players, don't get me wrong, but they're not good enough to take Arsenal back where they need to be, and that's challenging at the top end of the Premier League.
So who at Arsenal now dictates which players are targeted and bought, I wonder?
Well, I don't think they can flex their muscles. Certainly, if they don't make the Champions League, it'll have a massive bearing on it. But I think we're led to believe there's only 50-odd million available to spend. So obviously Emery's going to have to work his magic. He's going to have to find young players with value and develop them. Now, listen, he's a manager who puts a lot of stock and quality in terms of his work on the training ground. So I have no doubt about that. But in terms of being able to go out and buy the ready-made, the quick fix, Arsenal just can't do that right now.
Seamus Coleman was decent again.
Yeah, listen, so much has been said about Seamus Coleman, Joe, and a lot of people saying about his injury, and of course it takes a lot to get over that type of injury. It does, but Seamus, being Seamus, just said something with real common sense. And listen, sometimes you're just not in good form. And I think we're too quick to say, listen, he's 30 years of age now, it's a bad leg break. A leg break doesn't really have a massive effect on you in terms of slowing you down if it heals properly. It's not like a bad hamstring injury, a bad Achilles injury, a knee injury. He should be able to get over that. He should be able to get to what we've seen before. But let's not let's not, forget that he's not a 20-year-old now. He's approaching his 30s now. He has to manage himself better. But I had no doubts that he'd get back to a level that we normally associate with him.
And is he still on the comeback trail?
Well, listen, in terms of that, how bad that, and I think more than anything, the injury, a physical one, yes, but mental issues as well. We've seen it before with the likes of Aaron Ramsey. It takes a long time to get over those type of leg breaks. Of course it does. And I've seen it firsthand, the likes of Colin Healy, who was destined for big things with Ireland, and certainly in league level when he came to Sunderland, got a terrible bad break, didn't really recover from it. And I think that may be to do with medicine back then, but certainly Seamus would have had the best of treatment in terms of modern day thinking, in terms of getting it back. So he has fully healed physically. I believe he has now mentally. He's just not in great form at certain stages, but he'll get it back.
Okay. So that was yesterday. The weekend kicked off with a bang on Friday night. Mo Salah stepping up.
Wow.
It was just an amazing moment. I can only imagine what Liverpool fans are going through right now. I'd say it's a lot of fun and a lot of heart palpitations. And a lot of people, I'm sure, were screaming, "You've got to pass, you've got to pass, you've got to pass." Oh my God, what a goal.
It was an amazing goal. It really was. Bearing in mind, this is Salah, the type of goal you saw from him last year. It's not the Salah that he's been kind of wasteful in front of goal this season, struggling. I think it's 8 games without a goal, but he drove through. And you have to give credit to Bertrand, the last defender, who made it difficult, didn't make it that obvious to make that pass. And Bertrand, he could see that Salah was running at him. He got him onto his right side, kind of. He knew that he had recovering midfielders to put a bit of pressure on him. But as soon as Salah just worked it onto that inside left and whipped it, bearing in mind the goalkeepers read the situation, that finish had to be inch perfect. And it was off the inside of the post. I mean, it was such a great goal. It really was. It
was just lovely. Cultured, and as you said, he whipped it and got his body shape just right. And under the pressure, in an amazing moment. I was we'd Kev Kilban at the Everton game yesterday, and we were just chatting after the match, reflecting on the weekend. The romantic in you would look at Liverpool and wonder if there's an air of destiny about this season, and there's just something special happening. And yet the more logical viewer would look on and think, well, look at the way Liverpool are winning games too often, and look at the way City are cruising through games, and surely it just can't continue. Do you fall down on the side? Are you slightly confused?
No, not really. I don't really go along with the argument that they're getting late winners against a run of play or anything. I think it's controlled, it's measured, there's no panic. I was at the Fulham game when they gave away that silly equaliser, but within about 15 minutes to go, you're suddenly thinking you can't drop points here. I didn't see any panic from the players. I certainly didn't see it from the bench. They went about their business the same way, kept knocking on the door, believing that they find an opening. I think, listen, you're looking at the Lloris mistake and you're thinking, oh, wow, maybe perhaps then destiny is looking favourably on Liverpool. But in terms of the Southampton game, as soon as he made those changes, I couldn't see anything other than a comfortable Liverpool win. I really couldn't. And I know the clock's ticking down and you're thinking, is it going to be one of those days? But there's a difference about this Liverpool team. They are in far more control of games than they ever were last year. I know everyone's saying about they don't have the goals from that front three that they did last year, but it was more end-to-end stuff. They control the game now. They dictate. They get that opposition really backed onto their 18-yard box. And as a result, 90 minutes of defending in and around that area, bearing in mind they have the quality that they have, you would back them to find a way through, and they have done.
Well, there's so much talk about their best midfield. What's your favourite Liverpool midfield or shape?
Well, listen, I would have been one of those guys who would have seen that Keita had come in, we'd been bought, and thought, listen, this is the missing link in terms of a midfielder who can beat people, plays 1-2s around the box. I know he did something similar when he got his penalty, but it wasn't given. But he's been a massive disappointment. He really has. And I would still give him the benefit of that to say, listen, I don't care how good you are in any league around the world, in Europe, the Premier League asks questions that no other does. So it's a difficult one. But I still wouldn't look further than Henderson, Milner in that midfield, Wijnaldum, Fabinho. It would be any three from those four. And the reason I say that, I know that at times Liverpool fans are saying Henderson lacks creativity. But just love him for what he can do and don't hate him for what he can't. And what he gives you is that security. He allows just to sit in there. He allows those fullbacks then to go forward without any fear that they're going to be caught in a counter-attack. And he just sits alongside Fabinho, gives you energy, stops the opposition play. And I think as we go deeper into these competitions now, certainly in the Champions League quarter-finals, with the big games against Chelsea, I think Henderson, the likes of Milner, will get the nod in those games. In fact, I've got no doubt they will.
Well, wasn't it telling, I think, Munich away, he went with the three workhorses, and it was Fabinho on the bench. I mean, that was maybe an insight into how Klopp sees things as well. And yet, a lot of people credit the Henderson injury and Fabinho coming on has been one of the reasons Liverpool controlled that game so well for huge parts of it. I think the average Liverpool fan wants to see Fabinho on the pitch. Is there any of those, you said it's maybe 3 of those 4. Is there any 1 or 2 that you absolutely have in your best 11?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, listen, I would have Fabinho holding, just screening.
Yeah.
And then I'd certainly have Wijnaldum in terms of the energy, wanting to run ahead of the football in terms of late runs. I know he hasn't been at his top over the last month or so, but still I'd want him in there. And then it's Milner or Henderson as the third one.
Right, okay.
That's how I would go more than it. And people say about that Bayern Munich game as well. Liverpool controlled that. Listen, it's all well and good saying about the midfielders made the difference, but the likes of Salah, who everyone was critical of, didn't score. He put in a brilliant shift. That was a brilliant team performance.
Yeah. Do you put, I don't know how much stock you put in something like leadership. It's funny, I was watching just Gary Neville's Soccer Box, which is on all the time on Sky, and he was chatting to Jamie Carragher on an episode last night, and he was talking about the end of his career and how the manager likes you around the dressing room and there's so much you can give, but you ultimately feel at the crunch moments on the pitch, leadership doesn't count for all that much. You need to be really doing it. I think Jordan Henderson, and so often I see him screaming to everybody and gesticulating wildly and all that kind of stuff. And I wonder how much stock you put in that, being vocal on the pitch and leadership, quote unquote. Because I look at Milner and I think he gives them so much more than Henderson.
Yeah, listen, I totally agree with you there in terms of leadership, but there's a different type. I mean, that guy shouting and hollering is a cheerleader, not really influencing the game. I see through that all the time. I'm on about a problem solver as a captain, as a leader, where things are not going quite right. The bench can't get the message on, and you might just say to your midfielders, just sit in here a little bit. Let's just recover, or let's really go after them. We can sense something. Little changes in set pieces where you've done all your work throughout the week. The coaches will give you your jobs, but there's a slight tweak that they haven't seen. You need to be able to solve that before the issue is in the back of your net. That's leadership. That's the type of thing you want. And I can understand what Gary Neville's saying in terms of having him around the team or such, or that aging player. But you have to be able to contribute on the pitch, because otherwise you're a liability. Certainly at the level that he's playing at. I mean, Christ, you're playing for Manchester United. They don't carry anyone. They've got leaders in themselves. And it's not, I totally agree with you, Joe. I'm not one for those. There's a lot of different ways to captain. There's the type of captain who's there because he's the media darling. He does all the interviews afterwards. There's the other captain who does a lap of honour after every game, capping every single fan in the ground, shaking their hands, and they get the captaincy. The crowd think, oh, he's brilliant. But I think you can go into a change room, Joe, and you could literally do a vote and say, who's the captain here? Regardless of who wears the armband, who is the actual leader of this team? And I think more often than not, you'd have everyone agreeing that it's that person over there.
I'm already looking over at Virgil van Dijk lovingly.
Listen, he's a class act, isn't he? I mean, the frightening thing is that I think he's going to get better. And I've been banging the drum about him for a long time. I'd seen him in the Eredivisie. I'd covered that league quite a lot. And I could see the natural physical class that he had, the type of ingredients you need to be a top class centre half. Then he goes to Scotland and it was too easy. That's not being disrespectful for the league, but he gets into bad habits. He comes down to Southampton, he brings them bad habits with him, and ultimately what that is that he takes too long to get into good defensive positions because he knows the opposition not going to hurt him. Celtic can see the majority of the ball. He quickly learned about that at Southampton. He's gone to Liverpool, gone to a completely another level, and the only thing now that kind of is stopping him going down, well, at least I think he potentially will go down as one of the all-time best centre backs within the Premier League. But to actually challenge for that title of the best we've ever seen, it's just his concentration levels. At times, the game's too easy for him. And I think that's an argument that's been aimed at him throughout his career. That because it is so comfortable, he maybe switches off a little bit. And against the top players, they'll just be able to get in against you. And I think at times that goal against Southampton, maybe he should be dominating his midfielder a bit. Naby Keita staying with a runner, maybe saying to Matip, don't go so wide, don't split us at centre-half. Little things like that.
Champions League knockout stages are here. They basically just never fail to deliver lately. They're just outrageously good. It feels for the last 4, 5, 6 years.
The Champions League is just an incredible competition. It really is. And listen, we're having a fabulous Premier League title race. Of course we are. We've not seen anything in terms of the kind of drama. You feel that if anyone drops a point, blah blah blah. But the Champions League, you look forward to it, and when it comes around, see some of them ties. I think Liverpool against Porto. I think Porto, I've been led to believe, listening to their camp, wanted Liverpool, probably the only team who did, to avenge that 5-0 drubbing of last season. I'm not quite sure they'll be able to do that. But then you look at some of the other matchups, Spurs against Manchester City. I think you go for Manchester City big time, the type of form that Spurs are in, 1 point out of 15 in the Premier League. But everyone's talked about the drama and the fact that the delay of this stadium and how frustrating it's been. I think this delay and the timing of this stadium now has been the perfect boost for them, because their form's been so poor. They now suddenly got into their new stadium. They get that home wheel. They look like they're full of confidence again. And I know that Kevin De Bruyne and the Manchester City squad are saying, listen, the stadium doesn't beat you as such, but it is a massive boost for Tottenham. I do believe that. But I think that's going to be a top-class game. I think Pochettino, initially, when Guardiola came over, I always watched a game at White Hart Lane when Tottenham was so dominant that last season. And Guardiola's City couldn't cope with Spurs' energy. And it was interesting then that he changed the dynamic, brought himself 2 athletic fullbacks to replace the likes of Zabaleta, Clichy, Kolarov on that left-hand side. And then suddenly, Pochettino goes to Manchester City the following season, tries to do the same tactics, a high press against them, got absolutely battered. So it'll be fascinating to see what he thinks is his best tactics now going up against City.
Well, on that point, I was just having a look on the Guardian website. Jonathan Wilson was writing about the game, and he said when Spurs pressed high against City at the Etihad last season, hemming them in at every goal kick, they found the ploy negated by the long passing of Ederson. He hit 19 passes. His season average was 4 per game, but he hit 19 in that game brilliantly. They lost 4-1. And then he says in 2 games against City at Wembley since, Spurs have seemed unsure in their approach. On both occasions have been a little tepid, losing 3-1 and 1-0. So that sets it up.
Well, this is the thing. I think he's got great joy against the previous goalkeeper, Bravo, in terms of squeezing it high, saying, OK, you're good enough to hit these massive diagonal passes that a number 4, a playmaker, would struggle to make. And then you work from there. City are so expansive instead of spreading out. You'd win the ball back, you're breaking in on goal, your 2v1 situations, it's all in your favour. Suddenly you do that, and you've got a goalkeeper who's literally taking 4 or 5 of your players out of the game with one ball, then creating 1v1 situations for the like of De Bruyne, Sterling. You're bang in trouble. You can't do that. It's football suicide.
So that's going to be on Tuesday night. And then Wednesday we have Barcelona coming to Old Trafford. Messi and Suarez scored in the final 5 minutes against Atletico at the weekend for Barca. Messi now into 10 straight seasons where he's scored 40 goals or more, which is just silly. It's difficult in this job to think of new things to say about Messi, but he is still so clearly the story and still clearly the best player in the world. You kind of have to keep talking about him. Came off the bench against Villarreal as well and scored a free kick to get them back in the game. So he is still the key man, maybe more so than ever. Maybe more. There is more of a reliance on Messi than ever, it seems. They're clearly not the team they were, but he's pretty close to the player he was.
Listen, this is a debate that will rage for years and decades and generations, who's the best player ever. But for me, it will always be Messi. I've loved what Ronaldo's done in terms of creating himself into such an iconic player in terms of what he can do. He can head the ball, kick it. But Messi's just a genius. He's incredible. And you're talking about Barcelona now, 11 points clear at the top of La Liga. They're looking for their 8th title in 11 years. I mean, that's staggering, bearing in mind you're up against Real Madrid. And they just seem like they're in such a good flow. And I think about iconic games, certainly growing up, Man United v Barcelona, Mark Hughes scoring that goal in the Cup Winners' Cup in about 91, I think, at a really tight angle. But then I always remember asking Steve Bruce, who was a teammate of mine at Birmingham around about 96 time. I asked him about that game in 94 at the Nou Camp. They lost 4-0. He always tells a great story. I don't know if he's ever revealed it in a book or something, but I certainly haven't seen it. But he said they were lining up in the tunnel and they were walking out. And Romario was getting a ball and flicking it on one shoulder to the next, just flicking the ball over his head, walking along the tunnel. He turned to Pallister and said, we're in a bit of trouble here. And they were. I mean, that was an iconic Barcelona team at the time. Koeman was playing, Guardiola. But Romario, Stoichkov, those type of players, it was an incredible game. So listen, United have quality players. They'll probably think that on their day they can do it. But I still believe that Barcelona will be the strongest in that tie.
United have 8 days preparation, which is an interesting one.
That's massive.
That's a really nice thing, I'd say, as a professional team to get together and plan this whole thing out.
Yeah, it is, and I think Solskjaer doesn't get enough credit for tactically how good he's been in terms of prepping his team. Notably that game, the big defining moment in terms of will he, won't he get the job when he went to Spurs and they had a brilliant first half performance. I know De Gea kept him in the game with 11 saves as such, but nevertheless, that time on the training ground just allows you as coaches to dissect if you can find it, any weaknesses in Barcelona's game. You're going to have to watch as many games as possible. Your analysts will come with you and say, listen, there's a vulnerability here, whatever. And then you've got to put a plan in place and execute on a training ground. Then you're relying on the quality players. Can they do it on the big stage? But certainly that amount of time is something you would definitely need when you're coming up against Barcelona.
And we're looking at Manchester United have laid 3 defeats in 4. The losses to Wolves, twice. And then the Watford game was hardly inspirational. Is there any worry that the Solskjaer bounce has almost normalised and the memories of Mourinho are a long time ago and they're back to maybe more of a level that we might expect? Or are you expecting them to come big again?
Well, listen, it remains to be seen. Ultimately, I look at that and saying the concern for me with this United team is, are they reverting to type in that some of them are not good enough for Manchester United? And listen, again, we talked about Arsenal. I think Man United players are far superior to the Arsenal ones.
Yeah.
But there's a big difference, Joe, between being a top player and playing for Manchester United, coping with that pressure, coping with that expectation levels that you have to win things. Now, we're talking about a good season, Man United finishing 4th. That shows you the reduced status of United at the moment, that second in previous years, certainly when I was playing against them, was considered failure. So I know Solskjaer's got big ideas that they should be challenging, saying all the right things, but I think the last part of this season, certainly those guys who have improved under him, will still be watched by everyone there to say, listen, are these guys actually good enough to get United back where they believe they should be?
Yeah, we'll see. It's going to be an amazing couple of days football. Gary, we'll leave it there. Thanks a mil.
Joe, get on Hazard's goal. It is unbelievable.
Thank you. I've seen it. It was amazing. There were people in the office, and I won't name names or point fingers at Richie McCormick, who were giving out about the lack of tackling. But they couldn't tackle him. His feet were too quick. They didn't want to give away a penalty.
Wow, anyone get on that goal today, because that is goal of the season all day long. It's unbelievable. Listen, you'll say about the midfield, West Ham, why did they leave that area? But I don't care. There's about 5 or 6 players around him. In the space of about 5 yards, he beats them all and finishes. What a player.
OK, so goal of the season.
Up there, without a doubt. And the problem you have now at Chelsea is that they'll love that goal, but that's the type of goal that Real Madrid start convincing themselves, yeah, we actually do want him now, because they've been reluctant. Zidane's gone back there. Doesn't bode well for Chelsea, coupled with the fact that Hudson-Odoi is not signing a contract. Real crossroads for Chelsea right now.
Yeah, Florentino Perez has just said sign him about 25 minutes ago, I think. Listen, thanks a mil. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Joe. Good luck, mate.
Gary Breen there.